How many of you in this room who know Shantanu or know of Shantanu? Awesome. You know, the first time I spoke with him was, I think, last year. And I was fascinated by his journey and what he was doing and what he was building. And what was fascinating was not just the business of what he was doing, it was the passion with which he started working on this. And that is what drew me to try and learn more about him, more about his journey, and the thought with which he began his journey. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Shantanu, your first business was not Goodfellows, right? But then Goodfellows happened, and then Mr. Ratan Tata chose to back you up with his money. And what I know of you today is that you are now, if I were to safely use the term, a good fellow to Mr. Ratan Tata. How did the idea of Goodfellows come into your mind?
A bit of it was circumstance and a bit of it was my personal inclination, for which honestly there is no explanation. But I've always been affectionate towards the elderly community, anyone 60 plus. So if I walk into a room and I see a bunch of millennials, Gen Z, and I see a bunch of senior citizens sitting, I just gravitate towards them for some reason I cannot explain. But about the Goodfellows issue, I had senior citizen neighbors during COVID. I used to live in a small apartment in Colaba, and I couldn't cook for my life. And I couldn't get to groceries at that time. It was the peak of COVID. And these neighbors, without even me communicating this issue with them, sort of knew what was going on. They were Mr. and Mrs. Punjabi. And every day they used to bring over a hot plate of food. And I always used to think by the end of COVID, how is it that I'm going to repay this particular favor? And I could give them only what I had in abundance at that time, which was time. So I started giving them a lot of time. I started hanging out at that place half the day, and I quickly realized that the change in their demeanor, the change in their energy, and what they were picking up from me was more of a cognitive need for them. And for what was for me a bonus activity was actually something they were looking forward to then every day. And Colaba is full of southern Mumbai is full of senior citizens. And I thought to myself, this is just Mr. and Mrs. Punjabi. I just keep seeing senior citizens walk in and out of the building every day. And none of their sons and daughters are here in the country or are accessible. And that's because of circumstance and progression of whatever professional culture we have today. And that's not what we're going to talk about. But I quickly realized, why limit this to Mr. and Mrs. Punjabi? So I analyzed, to some extent, what is it that was making them so happy? Because I didn't want to pin it just on my charms. There was something going on there. So it was the intergenerational aspect. When you take two polar opposite generations and put them in a room together, especially 60 plus and 30 and younger, the exchange that happens of emotions, of energy, is so rich. Because the young get access to decades of wisdom, and the seniors get to live life again through the young eyes and feel relevant. And feeling relevant is such a challenge for senior citizens today, because everybody here has talked about how quickly technology has progressed, albeit in the healthcare space, but it has progressed in every sense. And I, myself, as a 30-year-old, am so averse to now learning anything new that comes on, that I can imagine how irrelevant and how outdated they must feel on a daily basis. So when a young person is constantly spending time with them, that relevance comes back in their life, and they feel that, okay, there's still something to look forward to. So that's how the origin of Goodfellows came into being.
Awesome. Do you see Goodfellows as a way of giving back to the society? Or do you see it as a passion project? Or do you see it as a business that you're trying to build?
I would take all those three boxes. And a passion, of course, because of reasons I mentioned. Giving back to society, more than giving back to society, I would say that this problem has arisen as circumstance as we have an aging population, in another 10 years is going to be a serious problem. We will be very close to Japan in terms of how many senior citizens we have. So this problem that has arisen out of circumstance, out of our societal progression in the country, is not to be put in the taboo category, or is not to be something to be afraid of, but to acknowledge it. First of all, we just acknowledge and say, we have senior citizens, their sons and daughters don't have the time. And we have to be able to acknowledge this without demonizing anybody, because that's not going to get us anywhere. We have this problem, we have to solve it, and this is one of the ways that we thought we could solve it. There is no companionship, we bring authentic companionship. So I wouldn't call it giving back to society as much as addressing an issue that is present and very much in our face. And in terms of business, excuse me. In terms of business, I think we are aiming for sustainability. I've spoken about this with you before. We are not looking to be a unicorn. We're not looking to raise valuation. If that happens as a byproduct of what we're doing, we're extremely grateful for it. But sustainability is something I'm definitely gunning for, and it's definitely not out of reach, because anything in society that you're trying to fix needs a business model today to sustain it and have the impact grow longer. Otherwise, it's always going to be a flash in the pan where it comes in, hypes up quite a lot, solves it for a little bit, but can't live long.
No, I absolutely agree with you, because the two things that actually come out of what you just said is that, one, the beginning is when you acknowledge that there is a problem that exists. And only when you acknowledge it would you want or make an effort to find a solution for it. And second is, every business or even a passion project for that matter, if it has to go and be run for over a period of time, it needs to be sustainable. Otherwise, there will be a time when you will give up. Shantanu, I remember when I was talking to you online and when you were pitching for this award, you mentioned that there were opportunities when the investors were wanting to put money in your project, and which you did not take in because you felt that you would need to compromise on certain principles with which you are running this venture. And the second thing was the hiring process of the Goodfellows. The process that you have seen work is a slow process. With these two things which are based on your fundamental principles on which you run Goodfellows, how do you think you're going to scale this business at the speed at which you would wish to do so?
The answer to that is extremely slowly, and we are okay with that. We are essentially dealing with human emotions as a service, and without commoditizing it, which is a very fine line that you walk, because one step towards a financial goal or fiduciary duties might in fact turn out to be against the DNA of the company, which is in fact creating authentic and meaningful relationships. So yes, we have had interest from investors who call it because of hype, because of PR, or because of genuine interest, wanted to invest in Goodfellows. But it was equally important for us to evaluate that for a business that has been built like a secret garden that you cultivate and grow slowly and with love and with empathy, because empathy is our central product. If you asked what is the central offering that Goodfellows has, I would call it empathy. Because every human capital that is recruited into the company is first vetted stringently for empathy. So we do scale slowly, especially given the process that you mentioned of finding empathetic people, and it's not that easy. I mean, I'm so happy that people have talked about empathy today in the medical field, but if you have to have empathy on a mass scale in the medical field or any field, it's just not that easy to mine, because you're literally handpicking people like diamonds. So how do you streamline this process? And the answer to that is you cannot. You can only make it slightly easier, and you can keep bringing in people, cultivating them, and looking for the raw material of empathy and then building on that for human capital. So all these factors combined, there's just no way that I can scale quickly. I have 10,000 applications to be a Goodfellow in the last 1 year from across the country. I have 800 senior citizens who are looking to subscribe to the service tomorrow. But if I were to compromise on how I go about doing things and how we ensure that every relationship, every person is authentic, not superficial, and not scripted, then it's a loss if I went down that road. So I am happy with scaling slowly because that's what it means to maintain and protect that empathy. And the moment I go into the commercial flow, then it's a loss for everybody. So yeah, I mean, anyone who is willing to be a part of this journey at the speed with which we are growing, because of the vision that we have, which in the end is to take care of our parents and grandparents, then we are definitely listening to you.
Shantanu, there was a time in my career when I was deliberating between my entrepreneurial opportunity that I had versus a beautiful job offer that I got from the corporate. And I went to my mentor and I asked him that, should I take up this opportunity, which is an entrepreneurial opportunity, or should I go in for this great corporate job which pays me well, which is going to give me that next jump? And this mentor turned around and told me that, Harbinder, why this or this? Why not both? And that I felt was an answer that I was not expecting, but that changed the way I thought. Both you and I are lucky that we are getting an opportunity to do two things which otherwise is a choice for most people, right? But if this was not the case, how would you think the journey of Goodfellows have been if that was your full-time role?
Given the amount of time I'm spending after my day job with Goodfellows, there would be very little change or very little difference in commitment. But I have always, as soon as I've locked on to a problem to solve, especially a social problem, I've always first gone out and found a team that puts their skin in the game. And in the case of Goodfellows, skin in the game basically means feel the same way about the impact that we're creating in the way that I am feeling it. You won't get 100% 1:1 correlation, but if you can find people who are 70 to 80% there and who make the company their own, it allows you to do what I am doing and what you're doing today. So if I was in Goodfellows 100%, of course, my dependability on them would probably be less. We would be talking about more larger vision more quickly. But I am okay with what I have today. Like you said, it's a blessing. And I think Goodfellows remains to be a full-time thing, and my day job also remains to be a full-time thing. So I don't think I split time. It's just constantly two parallel lanes going on. And I'm blessed to have a mentor who encourages that and sees Goodfellows also as a managerial responsibility, at the same time creating an impact that he himself is fond of.
And Shantanu, how do you think that tech, since we are in a conference which is talking of health tech, what is the role of technology that could be played in a business where empathy and human connect is the underlying fundamental of what is it that you want to create?
Right, that's a great question. And in senior care, we have so many age tech startups, as you call them, who are focused on making life easier for senior citizens. And of course, they're appreciated because they do want to make life easier, they want to make banking easier, etc. But the crux of the issue is with senior citizens and with all the elderly in our country will always be that they need someone to speak to and look forward to at the end of the day. They need that doorbell to ring. They need someone to walk in. They need the dependability of having human connection. And then you can make their lives easier. So as much as technology is a push from all directions, a lot of people ask us why we haven't entered into tech space yet. We will when we feel it's the right time, and we will definitely do it when we feel that we have established the foundation of human connection in all their lives, and now we can make it easier. So making it easier, there are a lot of people out there who are doing it. Maybe someday we will join them, but making their lives more filled with emotion, companionship, and their final years more forward to something, having something to look forward to. That's the goal of Goodfellows. So age tech can complement it in the future, but it's definitely not a necessity at Goodfellows.
And Shantanu, my last question to you before I let you go from the stage is that what has been your biggest learning from being a good fellow to Mr. Ratan Tata, and also from the learnings that came from other good fellows who've been there working with you in the last few years. What is that one or two big learnings that you have which you would want to share with all of us here today?
I wouldn't call it a learning, but I would call it an observation that an entire generation lies in our country ignored. And I don't blame the causation of that ignorance, but like I said at the beginning, and I would like to end with that, that we need to acknowledge that ignorance exists because of the lifestyles we have, because of the changing social dynamics, be it closer to the West or be it strictly East, doesn't matter. The fact remains that we have an aging population that needs someone to speak to and validate their existence, because without that, their physical and mental health is deteriorating at 15% per year. The retirement syndrome today hits harder than ever because you don't have people in the family to rely on. So we need to take cognizance of the fact that a simple conversation or regular check-ins can make their lives turn around so much. And I've experienced this through my Goodfellows. I've experienced this through my own grandparents. And I submit to you that we should consciously make an effort to the extent where Goodfellows does not need to exist at all in the future. I would encourage that possibility that one day we just don't need my startup anymore.
Thank you so much for that last closing. My learning from listening to all the speakers who've been there since morning, one thing that emerges is, and this is something that, a lot of us used to talk about when we were talking of startups, in the startup ecosystem a few years ago when that was a buzzword, it still is. But one realization is that when we are talking of technology, whether it is technology in whatever domain or health tech as we see today, the underlying belief, the intent with which we want to do something can be enhanced and be enabled by technology. But technology cannot take away the intent and the belief of whatever you are wanting to create. And that's been my observation of today. And thank you so much, Shantanu, for your time. And thank you so much for being here in person.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege. Thank you.